Welcome to Storyverse, where stories speak and you learn English naturally.
Chapter 1. A Bench in the Park. The wind curled through the narrow streets of New York like a whisper with teeth. Dry leaves chased one another across the pavement, spinning in frantic little dances as though trying to flee the cold. It was late November, and the first true chill of winter had settled in. To most, it was a signal to dig out coats, scarves, and gloves. But for Soapy, it meant something else. It meant time was running out. He sat on his usual bench in Madison Square Park, a worn figure in a frayed overcoat. His collar was turned up against the wind, but it did little to stop the shiver that ran down his spine. With his hands stuffed into the deep pockets of his coat, Soapy watched the world move past him. People bundled in wool and leather, rushing toward warm homes, hot meals, and flickering fireplaces. He had none of those things. No roof, no hearth, no supper waiting, just that bench and a plan. Every year, around this time, Soapy got himself arrested. He didn't mind jail. In fact, he welcomed it. 3 months of shelter, food, and warmth. No questions asked, no rent, no worry. It wasn't freedom, but it was something like survival. And that, he'd come to believe, was enough. He wasn't always like this. There was a time when Soapy wore clean shirts and tipped waiters. But life, with its cruel sense of humor, had stripped those layers away one by one, until he was left with only this: a battered coat, a sharp wit, and a strategy for winter. With a deep breath that clouded in the cold air, he rose from the bench. It was time. He passed a bakery with its windows steamed and glowing from the heat within. The scent of bread and sugar reached out like a warm hand, almost pulling him inside. But he shook it off. He didn't want a handout. He wanted a charge. He wanted steel bars and prison blankets. Across the street, a well-dressed man dropped a newspaper and stepped into a cafe. Soapy waited, watching. The moment was right. He brushed himself off, straightened his collar, and walked into a high-end restaurant like he belonged. The hostess hesitated, but Soapy was quick with words. "I've been here before," he said smoothly. "I just need a seat by the window. I like to see the city while I eat." She nodded, unsure, and guided him to a small table. The menu was heavy, leather-bound. Soapy ordered the most expensive dish he could find and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The food warmed his stomach like a fireplace from the inside out. And when the check came, he simply smiled. "I have no money," he said calmly. The waiter blinked. "Excuse me?" "No money," Soapy repeated. "None at all. Call the police if you must." He leaned back, ready. This was it. But the manager didn't call the police. He called the busboy. "Get him out of here," the man growled, "and don't let him back." 2 strong arms lifted Soapy from his seat and tossed him out like yesterday's bread. No police, no arrest, just bruises on his elbow and pride. Soapy stood on the sidewalk, brushing dust from his coat. He looked up at the sky, gray, distant, unbothered by his failure. "Well," he muttered, "that didn't go quite as planned." He tried again later that day. This time he picked up a stone and hurled it through a shop window. The crash echoed down the block like a starter's pistol. A man ran out of the store shouting, but Soapy stood his ground. "I did it," he declared, arms raised. "I broke the glass." The man blinked at him, looked around, and then turned his attention elsewhere. "Didn't see a thing," he said, vanishing back inside. "Must have been a mistake." No police. Soapy's frustration simmered. He was doing everything wrong just to get something right. Why wouldn't the city cooperate? As the light began to fade and the chill deepened, he found himself wandering aimlessly. He tried shouting in the street, pretending to be drunk, cursing loudly at strangers, but no one seemed to notice or care. He was invisible. By the time he returned to his bench in the park, the shadows had lengthened, and the wind had found new strength. His breath came in short, frosted clouds. His feet ached, his spirit sagged. He sat again, this time not as a man with a plan, but as one slowly losing grip on even the illusion of control. Above him, the branches shivered in the wind like skeletal fingers. A child skipped past with her mother, laughing in a coat 2 sizes too big. Soapy didn't look away. He watched them until they were gone. He pulled his coat tighter and leaned back. Winter was coming. Whether he found warmth or not, it would not wait.
Chapter 2. Crimes Without Consequences. The wind pushed through the streets like a thief, stealing warmth from anything it touched. Soapy tightened his worn coat around him as he shuffled toward a brightly lit restaurant. He could smell roasted turkey and buttered rolls from the sidewalk. A perfect place to get arrested. He straightened his back, brushed off his sleeves, and stepped inside like a man with money in his pocket. The waiter eyed him with suspicion, but said nothing. Soapy sat, ordered confidently, roast beef, mashed potatoes, pie, and coffee. He ate slowly, savoring every bite like a man enjoying his last meal. When the check arrived, he patted his empty pockets and looked up with a calm smile. "I've nothing to pay you with," he said. The waiter didn't call the police. Instead, he called 2 kitchen staff, who promptly threw Soapy out into the freezing night. No jail, no warmth, just more cold. He sat on the curb, brushing crumbs from his sleeve. "That should have worked," he mumbled. Undeterred, he moved to his next plan, a shattered window. He picked a quiet shop, picked up a stone, and hurled it through the glass. Alarm screamed, and a crowd formed. A policeman turned the corner and saw Soapy calmly standing there. "I broke the window," Soapy announced proudly. The officer looked him up and down. "Nah, probably some kids. Move along, old man." Soapy was stunned. He was trying to confess, and no one believed him. Soapy wandered the streets, now frustrated. He saw a woman standing alone and shouted nonsense at her, expecting a public disturbance charge. But she just laughed and walked away. At a church gathering, he shouted again, threw his arms around, and expected someone to call for help. But the priest gave him a sympathetic look and asked gently, "Would you like a blanket, sir?" Kindness. Even that was a punishment. Each attempt felt more pathetic than the last. Every failed crime chipped away at his dignity. His stomach twisted, not from hunger this time, but from something deeper. Shame. Uselessness. He wasn't even worth a pair of handcuffs. He stared at his reflection in a shop window. Was this what he'd become? A man begging to be caged? The city was moving on without him. The streets didn't notice him anymore. And maybe that was worse than punishment. Being invisible. He wandered back towards the park bench, feeling like a failed criminal and a forgotten man. The night deepened. Soapy curled into himself on the bench, the cold biting through his coat again. His breath came out in the little clouds. Somewhere in the distance, someone was playing a violin. Soapy closed his eyes. For the first time in years, it wasn't the cold that bothered him most. It was the silence inside.
Chapter 3. The Organ in the Window. The wind still whipped down the avenues like a warning, but Soapy had stopped walking. His worn shoes pressed into the cold pavement, forgotten. He stood frozen, not from the chill, but from something unfamiliar. A sound, soft, steady, and utterly out of place in the rough rhythm of the street. An organ. The notes floated from an old church, its stone walls darkened by time, its stained glass windows dim against the fading light. The music didn't shout. It whispered. It called not to the ears, but to the soul. Soapy's breath caught. He took a step closer, and then another. Across the street, behind a modest window lit with a warm yellow glow, he saw a family gathered. A woman placed steaming bowls on a small wooden table. A child laughed just once, and then leaned against the shoulder of a man who was smiling gently as he removed his coat. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't grandeur. It was peace. Something stirred deep within Soapy. A memory, long buried, began to push through the layers of cold and time. Once he had worn a clean shirt. Once he had felt the warmth of a real home. Once he had been welcome at a table. The music played on. He leaned against the black iron fence outside the church and listened. Not to the melody, but to the silence inside himself. For the first time in many winters, it wasn't filled with bitterness or plans. It was filled with questions. What had he done with himself? How far had he fallen? And more frightening than anything, could he rise again? In that moment, the cold didn't matter. The hunger faded. Soapy felt something inside him awaken, a flicker, fragile but real. Not a fantasy, not a dream, a decision. He would change. He would find work, even if it was small and humble. He would clean himself up. He would speak to the man and the mission. Maybe even write a letter to the sister who hadn't heard from him in years. Soapy stood straighter. The organ's last note faded, but its echo remained in his chest. The night still stretched out before him, long and merciless. But suddenly, it didn't feel like an ending. He turned from the church, not to walk away, but to walk toward something. For the first time in a long while. Chapter 4. One step too late. Soapy stepped into the street with new resolve. The decision he had made outside the old church pulsed through his body like warmth. It was strange. How light his heart suddenly felt, though his coat remained thin and his pockets still empty. He walked with purpose now, not toward crime or chaos, but toward something quieter. Redemption. He would find a place to wash. He would speak to someone at the mission. Tomorrow, he would begin again. Tonight, he would sleep beneath the stars, not as a man defeated, but as a man waiting for dawn. As he crossed into Madison Avenue, the world around him seemed somehow softer. The sharpness of the city dulled for just a moment. A carriage passed. The scent of roasted peanuts drifted from a cart. Somewhere, a dog barked and a door slammed shut. Life was continuing, and Soapy had decided to rejoin it. He paused beneath a street lamp. The light buzzed faintly above his head. He tilted his face up into its glow and smiled. A small, weary smile, but real. And then behind him, a voice. "Hey you, what are you doing there?" He turned slowly. A uniformed policeman stepped toward him, his expression already drawn with assumption. "Nothing, officer," Soapy said gently. "Just standing here." "Loitering," the officer muttered. "Move along." "I will," Soapy replied. "I was just thinking." But the officer didn't hear the shift in his tone, didn't see the difference in his posture, didn't know that this man, this vagrant, was no longer looking for trouble, but for a second chance. "You're coming with me," the officer said. "Judge'll see you in the morning." Soapy didn't resist. What could he say that would matter? The city had already decided what he was. The next day, standing in court beneath high ceilings and cold stairs, he didn't plead. He didn't fight. 3 months, the judge said. Blackwell's Island. Soapy was led away in chains. He had gotten what he once sought: a warm cell, regular meals, shelter from the cold. But it no longer felt like safety. It felt like a stolen chance. The life he had decided to reclaim now stood on the other side of winter, waiting without him. As the ferry pulled toward the prison island, Soapy stared at the distant skyline. The church spire still rose above it all, silent and unknowing. Somewhere behind its walls, the organ might still be playing. He closed his eyes, and the music played on, in his memory, not as a comfort, but as a reminder. Freedom had come to him for one brief moment, like a bird landing on his shoulder, only to be frightened away by the heavy hand of fate. He was too late. And now, winter would be colder than ever before.